We landed in Yangon late in the afternoon after nearly 20 hours of flying. I was completely drained. The heat and humidity hit me the moment we stepped out of the airport. It felt like my skin was covered in a layer of warm syrup. All I wanted was a shower and a bed. We hadn't booked anything in advance, which was probably stupid in hindsight, but we were trying to stay flexible. We figured we'd find something cheap for the first night and then decide where to stay longer once we were rested and thinking clearly. There were a few cab drivers waiting outside the airport, and one of them gave us a printed pamphlet for a hotel that sounded all right. Nothing fancy, but it looked clean in the pictures and was in our price range. The guy called the hotel for us, confirmed that they had rooms available, and 20 minutes later we were pulling up to the entrance. The building looked older than the photos. The lobby had this weird smell, like a mix of mothballs and something musty. The lights in the hallway were dim and flickered now and then. A small sign taped to the check-in desk said something about ongoing maintenance. The guy at the front desk didn't speak much English, but he was polite. He told us the rates were reduced because they were doing fumigation and other repairs on certain floors. We were put on the 4th floor. The elevator was working, but it was painfully slow and made these strained mechanical groans every time it moved. I didn't care. I just wanted to lie down. Our room wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible either. 2 twin beds, both kind of sagging in the middle. There was an old air conditioning unit in the window that made a loud rattling noise but managed to keep the room cool. The wallpaper was peeling in spots and the carpet had some dark stains that looked like they'd been there forever. The bathroom was functional, lukewarm water, low pressure, but it was a shower and that was good enough. Everything was slightly damp to the touch, like it hadn't fully dried in years, but I told myself to ignore it. We went out to grab a quick dinner from a roadside stall, some skewered meat, sticky rice and bottled water, and came back to the room by around 9 p.m. I was so exhausted that I barely managed to brush my teeth before collapsing on the bed. I remember thinking that I'd check out some other hotels in the morning, maybe find something a little nicer for the next few nights. But that was it. I passed out almost immediately. I slept straight through the night, didn't even turn over. When I opened my eyes, sunlight was coming through the old curtains, and I felt like I'd been asleep for 10 hours. I looked over at my phone, 7:38 a.m. It was the first time in days that I felt like a human being again. My friend was already up, scrolling through his phone. We both got ready and headed downstairs for the hotel's complimentary breakfast. The breakfast was set up in a small dining area off the lobby. It was basic toast, some fruit, coffee that tasted like burnt mud, and hard-boiled eggs. While we were eating, a couple of travelers, Germans I think, came and sat at the table next to us. They looked like they hadn't slept at all. One of them had bags under his eyes and kept rubbing his forehead like he was hungover. They spoke a little English and asked us what floor we were staying on. We said the 4th. One of them just shook his head slowly and said something like, "Good. We were on 6. We asked if something had happened. They said that at around 2 a.m., someone came banging on their door. A hotel worker with a flashlight, barely able to explain what was going on, told them to pack up their things and follow him. Half asleep, they were moved to a different room on the 3rd floor. They said the guy seemed nervous, rushing them along, avoiding eye contact. At first, they thought maybe there was a plumbing issue or some kind of security problem. They didn't really know what was happening. Later that morning, we bumped into them again in the lobby. They had talked to another guest who told them that the 6th floor had been closed for maintenance. And not just regular maintenance, fumigation. Apparently, the hotel was gassing entire sections of the building for bugs. The kind of gas that fills the rooms and kills anything crawling around. They had already cleared most of the floor, but for some reason, a few rooms had still been booked out by mistake. The Germans had been in one of them, but they were lucky. They were woken up and moved before anything happened. The real horror was that the people in the room next to theirs weren't. 2 travelers. No one knew much about them, just that they had checked in late like us. By the time anyone realized they were still in that room, it was too late. They were found the next morning, dead. Their door had been sealed from the outside. The nozzle or hose or whatever had been shoved under the door in the middle of the night, just like the others. But nobody had checked that the room was empty first. We didn't believe it at first. I thought maybe it was an exaggeration. Some rumor passed along from guest to guest. But we saw police at the hotel later that day. Not sirens blazing, crime scene tape stuff, just a few officers talking to the staff near the front desk, looking serious. There was a language barrier, but it was clear that something had gone very wrong. We quietly asked one of the receptionists if it was true. All she said was, "Maintenance accident. All okay now." We checked out immediately. I didn't even want to stay for the second night we'd paid for. The idea that we could have been put on that same floor, maybe even in that same room, made my stomach turn. There were no alarms, no checks, no signs on the door, just someone with a list, getting ready to gas a floor full of bugs, and trusting that someone else had cleared the rooms first. It was a cheap hotel. No real system, no accountability. It wasn't evil, just careless in a way that turned deadly. That stuck with me, still does. Every time I stay in a hotel now, especially in a country where I don't speak the language, I check everything. I don't care if I seem paranoid. I ask what floor I'm on, if anything is being done around the building, if there's any reason I should be worried. I don't care how tired I am. I always check, because those people who died didn't do anything wrong. They just went to sleep, same as I did, same as anyone would. And that's the part one can't forget. One small mistake, a mix-up in a logbook, a room that should have been empty, a door that never should have been sealed. And just like that, 2 people never woke up. I was on a solo bike trip from my home in Grand Haven up to Mackinac City. It had been something I planned for months, just me, the open road, and as few plans as possible. I packed light, mostly staying in cheap motels along the way, grabbing meals wherever I found them, and pushing through as many miles as I could before sunset. That particular day had been rough. I'd done close to 70 miles under a blazing sun and with a headwind that made everything feel uphill. My thighs were burning, my water bottles were warm, and by the time I rolled into Traverse City, I was done, completely spent. I didn't make any reservations. I never did. I just rolled into whatever looked cheap and not too sketchy. This one was a Days Inn, I think, or maybe it used to be one. The sign had clearly been replaced recently with some new generic branding, like Country Inn or Midwest Comfort or something like that. It looked fine. A 2-story place with outside stairwells and long concrete walkways. Typical mid-budget roadside motel. I didn't care. All I needed was a working lock, hot shower, and something with a bed. The guy at the front desk barely looked up when I came in. Paid in cash, no big deal. Got a key card and a laminated map showing me where the room was. Ground floor all the way near the back. Fine by me, closer to the bike. I locked the frame to the metal railing just outside the door and hauled my small bag inside. The room was like every motel room. Off-white walls, that thin patterned carpet that probably hadn't been shampooed in years. A queen bed with one of those stiff multicolored coverlets no one ever uses. A little circular table and 2 chairs. A low dresser with a TV bolted on top. Microwave, mini fridge. The bathroom light flickered when I flipped it on but stayed lit. Water pressure was decent. The AC unit under the window growled to life and blew out cold air, which was all I needed. I took a long shower, letting the hot water work out the stiffness in my legs. After that, I lay on the bed with my iPad, just scrolling through stuff, trying to relax. It was dark outside by then, so I pulled the blackout curtains shut all the way and turned off the main lights. Only the glow of the iPad lit the room. After a while, I ended up watching some porn. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just something to wind down. I didn't expect to fall asleep immediately, but after finishing, I tossed the iPad to the side and started dozing off. The room was pitch dark, quiet except for the hum of the AC. That's when it happened. A sudden, intense blue flash lit up the entire room. It was like someone set off a camera flash right above my head. The light was bright, too bright. For a split second, I saw everything in the room lit up in stark detail. The bed, the chair, the edges of the mirror, the flat screen, all of it illuminated in cold blue-white like a bolt of lightning. Only there was no thunder, no storm, and the curtains were drawn shut. I hadn't left any windows open. There was no way it came from outside. It scared the absolute shit out of me. I sat straight up in bed, completely alert, heart racing. My first thought wasn't supernatural or anything weird like that. I instantly went to camera, flash, surveillance. I looked around the room, waiting to see if anything else would happen. Nothing, just the dark again, and the hum of the AC like nothing happened. But I knew what I saw. It wasn't a dream. I wasn't asleep long enough to dream. That flash was real. I got out of bed and turned on every light in the room. I checked the iPad to see if it glitched or something. Maybe some random app notification or system crash. Nothing. Just the usual sleep screen. Then I started checking around. First, I scanned every corner, every vent, every visible surface. Then I went for the mirrors. I remembered all the stories you hear about two-way mirrors in shady motels. I tapped on the glass, then banged it with my knuckles. Still wasn't sure, so I yanked the whole damn thing off the wall. It was just mounted on screws, no bracket behind it. Nothing hidden. I checked the smoke detector, just a blinking red light. I unscrewed it anyway. No camera, no mic. Then the TV, nothing behind it, nothing under the dresser. I even pulled the mattress up and looked underneath. The bed frame was solid metal, nothing hollow or strange. The mini fridge, empty except for an ice cube tray. I looked behind the AC, under the sink, inside the light fixtures. I went through the entire room inch by inch. I even stood on the table to look at the ceiling tile seams. No visible openings, no lens reflections, nothing suspicious. I must have spent an hour going through everything, ripping stuff apart, pulling out drawers, lifting up cushions, checking the edge of every vent cover. Nothing. Not a single sign of any kind of recording device, no hidden panels, nothing that could have given off that flash. But I couldn't let it go. I didn't know if I'd triggered something accidentally, or if someone was screwing with me from another room. Maybe someone had a remote device. Maybe the flash was some kind of motion-triggered light inside the wall or behind a vent I couldn't access. But there was no noise, no buzzing, no lens movement, nothing else after that one flash. Eventually, I gave up. I sat on the edge of the bed and just stared at the floor for a while. My hands were shaking, and my stomach was in knots. I felt exposed, violated, even like someone had caught me in a moment that was supposed to be private. There was no way I was going to fall asleep again, not in the dark. So I left all the lights on, ceiling light, bathroom light, lamp. I got fully dressed again, socks and shoes too. I even stuffed a towel under the door crack in case someone was peeking through. I didn't lay down after that. I just sat in the chair, facing the door the whole night, watching, waiting. My eyes kept drifting back to the curtain, wondering if there was something behind it I missed, but I didn't dare open it. The idea that someone might be watching from outside made my skin crawl. Eventually, the sun started to rise, and light filtered through the sides of the curtain. I stood up slowly, sore and tired, and opened it just a crack. Nothing was outside, just my bike, locked where I'd left it. The parking lot was empty, quiet. The office was still dark. No movement. I packed up fast. Didn't even shower again. Just stuffed everything into my bag, unlocked my bike, and got the hell out of there. I didn't stop to talk to anyone. Didn't check out at the front desk. I just rode. I didn't even eat breakfast until I was halfway to Petoskey. To this day, I still think about that flash. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't my imagination. It was real. Something lit up that room from the inside, and I never figured out what it was. I haven't stayed in a roadside motel since. Now I only book places through people I trust, and I bring a camera detector and flashlight with me every time. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just some electrical glitch I couldn't explain. But that feeling, that moment when everything lit up like daylight while I was most vulnerable, it changed something in me. Something I don't think I'll ever get back. It was late in the afternoon when we realized we weren't going to make it to San Diego before nightfall. My mother had been driving for hours, and her shoulders were tense, her eyes bloodshot from the road. I had offered to take over, but she always insisted on driving herself. said she didn't trust anyone else with the wheel, not even me. We had started our trip that morning, planning to drive straight through from Northern California, but traffic and roadwork had slowed us down to a crawl. Somewhere near the outskirts of a small desert town, we decided to stop for the night. There weren't any major hotel chains nearby, just a few rundown motels, a gas station, and a small bed and breakfast tucked between some dusty pine trees. My mom didn't like motels. She said they were too exposed, too easy for people to break into. She also had this fear of hidden cameras, said the wrong kind of people put them in vent covers, smoke detectors, even behind two-way mirrors. That last one always stuck with me. She'd read about it once, and after that, she checked every place we stayed for signs of hidden rooms or mirrors that looked suspicious. We pulled into the gravel parking lot of the bed and breakfast. The building was older, with fading yellow paint and warped wooden trim. It looked like a house that had been converted into an inn. There was a small front porch with a swinging bench and a white sign above the door that simply read, "Welcome." There were no other cars in the lot. Inside, the front room smelled like old books and stale coffee. A single bulb lit the room with a soft yellow glow. A man in his late 60s came out from a back hallway, wearing slacks and a tucked-in button-down shirt. His face was clean-shaven, but his eyes were puffy and red, like he hadn't slept much. He asked for our names and gave us a room key without much talk. Room 3. He handed us a single brass key attached to a wooden tag. No card reader, no security, just a key. My mom didn't say much to him. She nodded once and took the key. The hallway to the room was narrow, the wooden floor creaking beneath our steps. The wallpaper was peeling in places, revealing cracked plaster underneath. We passed a single framed picture of a lake, maybe from decades ago. The air smelled different back there. Stale, closed off, like no one had been down the hall in a while. Room 3 was at the end of the hallway. The key stuck a little in the lock, but it turned eventually. The room was small. One queen bed, an old wooden dresser, a chair in the corner, and a mirror mounted above the desk. There was a tiny bathroom with a yellowed sink and a stained tub. The bedspread was clean enough, but thin, like it had been washed too many times. The window faced a wall of overgrown bushes that blocked out most of the light. My mom shut the door behind us and immediately began her routine. She didn't waste time. First, she went into the bathroom, lifted the toilet lid, looked under the sink, pulled the shower curtain back, even tapped the tiles with her knuckles. Then she stood on the edge of the tub and checked the smoke detector on the ceiling. She didn't say anything, just kept moving. I watched from the chair by the window. I was used to it by now. It was weird, yeah, but it made her feel better. She came out into the main room and looked around. Her eyes landed on the mirror above the desk. It was about 3 feet wide and 2 feet tall, set in a simple wooden frame. Something about it made her pause. She stood still for a second, then walked over and turned off all the lights in the room. I sat still, not saying a word. I could barely see her in the dark, just her silhouette as she pulled out the flashlight from her bag. She flicked it on and pressed the beam directly into the mirror. I didn't know what she was looking for at first, but then I noticed something strange. In the flashlight's glare, the reflection of the beam didn't come back at the same angle. The glass didn't reflect the light the way a normal mirror should. It almost absorbed it, dulled it. She pressed her hand against the glass. Then she knocked 3 soft taps. There was a hollow sound behind it, not like drywall or brick, more like empty space. She didn't say anything, just turned the flashlight off and stood there in the dark. I could hear her breathing, slow and shallow. Then she whispered something so quietly I could barely hear it. "Get your bag." I didn't ask questions. I stood up and grabbed my backpack, keeping quiet. She flicked the light back on and opened the door slowly. We stepped into the hallway without turning on the room light. She didn't even bother to close the door behind us. We walked quietly down the hallway, her hand tight around her keys. The old man wasn't at the desk when we passed the front room. No one was. Outside, the air was cooler. The night sky was clear. The parking lot was still empty except for our car. My mom got in the driver's seat and unlocked the doors. I jumped in and threw my bag in the back. She started the engine without a word and pulled out of the lot. We didn't even look back at the building. We drove for about 20 minutes before she pulled into a rest stop. It was just off the highway, with a few trucks parked and some vending machines under a flickering light. She turned off the engine and leaned back in her seat. I could see her hands trembling a little on the steering wheel. We didn't talk for a while. Eventually, she pulled a blanket from the back and handed it to me. We slept in the car that night. It wasn't comfortable, but we both felt safer that way. The next morning, we got back on the road without saying anything about what happened. But as we passed back through that town, we noticed something strange. The sign for the bed and breakfast was gone. The porch looked empty. Curtains were drawn in every window. It looked like no one had been there in weeks. We didn't stop. We just kept driving. To this day, I don't know if there really was someone behind that mirror. Maybe it was an old storage closet. Maybe the guy was just living there alone and kept weird habits. But that mirror was wrong. That hollow sound, it wasn't just the wall. My mom still talks about that trip sometimes. Says it was the only time she ever left a place without saying a word. And after that night, she never stayed at another bed and breakfast again. Only big-name hotels, and even then, she checks every room just like she always did. I don't blame her. I still think about that mirror, and I still wonder what was on the other side. It was the middle of summer when my dad and I found ourselves somewhere just outside of Savannah, Georgia. We'd been driving all day, exhausted and sore from being cramped in the car for so long. We hadn't planned to stop in Garden City, but we couldn't keep going either. My dad's eyes were bloodshot, and my legs were stiff and twitchy from sitting too long. We needed a place to crash badly, but the only option we found that didn't cost over $100 a night was this rundown-looking motel that came up on his phone $50 a night. That should have been our first red flag. It looked sketchy even from the road, but we were tired and desperate. The sign was missing letters and flickered like something out of a horror movie. Only half of it lit up. The parking lot had maybe 2 cars in it, and both looked like they hadn't been moved in weeks. We pulled in anyway. The lobby was in a completely separate building across the lot, kind of far from the actual motel rooms. At the time, I just thought it was weird. Some motels are set up like that, right? Still, it didn't feel right. Something about how separated everything was. Like they wanted distance between guests and staff on purpose. We parked in front of the lobby and went inside. It smelled faintly of bleach and something else, kind of like sour milk. The man at the desk didn't say much. He handed us a key card without even making eye contact. The check-in took all of 2 minutes. There was no paperwork, no signature. Just a key and a room number scribbled onto the sleeve of a coffee-stained envelope. Room 203. We drove the car around to the building. It didn't even look like a motel. It looked like an old, abandoned dormitory. Brick exterior with peeling paint. The front door was literally off its hinges, leaning against the wall to the side like someone had just given up and left it there. I remember stepping over it, thinking, this can't be real. But my dad just kept moving forward like he didn't want to acknowledge how bad it was. We climbed the stairs to the 2nd floor. The card reader on the door was cracked, wires sticking out, like someone had tried to pry it open with a screwdriver. On the window right beside it was a big black X painted across the glass. I still have no idea what that meant. Was it condemned? Was it some kind of warning? No idea. It gave me chills, though. It didn't help that as soon as we turned into the hallway, which looked exactly like the hallway from The Shining. Long, dim, stained red carpet, flickering lights. We saw 2 guys leaning against a doorway near the end. They looked like they were just standing there, not talking or anything. As soon as they saw us, they bolted in opposite directions. Not a word, just gone. My dad hesitated for the first time. He paused, but only for a second. I think he didn't want to admit that we were in a place that was probably dangerous. We walked down the hall, passing stains on the carpet, half-screwed light fixtures, and what looked like a burn mark on the wall. Every door was either dented, scratched, or patched up badly. Some looked like they'd been kicked in. The whole place gave off this heavy, silent dread. like something had happened there and the walls remembered it. Room 203 was at the very end of the hall. The door was warped like it had taken water damage. My dad slid the card through the broken reader, and somehow it still worked. The lock clicked open. I don't even know how to describe the room properly. It was like someone had taken a prison cell and tried to make it look like a cheap motel room. The bed was pushed up against the wall, leaving maybe 2 feet of space on either side. There was a single bulb hanging from the ceiling with no shade. It gave off this sickly yellow light that buzzed faintly. The walls were off-white with dark blotches here and there, and one corner of the ceiling looked like it had black mold growing on it. The floor creaked when we stepped in, and the air smelled like mildew and cigarette smoke. There was no TV, just a tiny wooden desk that was cracked down the middle and a single chair that looked like it had been pulled from a junkyard. The window had thick curtains, but they were tied in a knot and didn't move when we pulled. My dad went straight to the bed and lifted the blanket. That's when he froze. He looked away quickly, made a noise like he was about to gag, and dropped the blanket back down. I asked what it was, but he just shook his head, said nothing, but I had to know. I walked over and pulled the blanket all the way off. There was this enormous rust-colored stain on the mattress, starting from the middle and spreading out like someone had dumped a bucket of brown paint. Except it wasn't paint. You could smell it. It was old, but the scent was still there, buried in the fabric. It was blood. I knew it. Not fresh, but not ancient either. And it wasn't just a small patch. Covered nearly half the mattress. The shape, the color, the size, it didn't look like a spill. It looked like someone had bled out right there and no one had bothered to change the mattress. It looked like someone had died in that bed. I backed up immediately. My dad didn't say a word, but I saw his face. He was pale. He looked like he wanted to puke. Neither of us even thought about complaining or asking for another room. That would have meant going back to the lobby, talking to the guy at the desk, and risking who knows what. My gut told me not to do it. Something was seriously wrong with that place, and we had already overstayed. We didn't even gather our things. We hadn't unpacked anyway. We just left. We moved fast, heads down. No one was in the hallway now, just the buzzing lights and that awful red carpet. The front door was still on the ground. We stepped over it again and nearly ran to the car. As soon as the doors were shut, my dad locked them, started the engine, and peeled out of the lot. I remember looking in the rearview mirror as we left. The building just sat there, dark and silent, like it had swallowed us and was watching us go. I told my dad we should take pictures, maybe report it or something, but he said no. His hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I'd never seen him like that before. He said he didn't want to go back, not even for a second. And honestly, I don't blame him. That place wasn't just dirty or cheap. It felt wrong. Like something happened there, maybe more than once. Like the kind of place where no one asks questions, and no one ever cleans up the messes that get left behind. I don't know what the story behind that motel was. I don't want to know. We ended up driving another hour to a chain hotel by the highway and paying triple the price. And neither of us slept much that night anyway. We never talked about that night again after the trip. We just buried it. But sometimes when I'm traveling and we pass by a shady motel off the road, my stomach tightens. I think about that stained mattress, the broken card reader, the guys in the hallway, the X on the window. I think about how close we were to staying there, how close we were to something. And I'm just glad we left when we did. I had just wrapped up a brutal 5-day work event, the kind where your body feels like it's operating on backup power. 10 hours of sleep across 5 days. I could barely keep my eyes open by the time I got to the airport. My flight was out of the country and landed late afternoon. By the time I cleared customs, got my bags, and found a cab, I was running on fumes. I didn't care about anything except finding a bed and passing out for a full day if I could. I had booked this motel online because it was cheap and not too far from the airport. It looked fine in the pictures, small, older, but manageable. When we pulled up, though, it was clear the photos were either very old or heavily edited. The building looked tired. Faded paint, some of the siding was cracked, and one of the neon letters from the sign wasn't working. I didn't care. I just wanted a place to crash. I checked in at the front desk. The guy behind the counter barely looked at me. No smile, no welcome. He handed me the key card and told me the room was down the side corridor, second to last door on the right. I thanked him out of habit, even though he was already looking at his phone. The hallway smelled musty, like damp carpet that had never fully dried. The walls were a pale yellow, stained in places, and the lighting flickered every so often. When I got to my room, I noticed the door looked slightly off, like it had been kicked in at some point and never properly fixed. I slid the keycard in and it clicked open. Inside, the room wasn't great. The carpet felt damp under my shoes, like someone had just cleaned it and didn't let it dry fully. The blankets on the bed were thin and smelled a little like mildew. There was a single chair in the corner, a small round table with water rings on it, and a TV that looked like it hadn't been updated since the early 2000s. The bathroom was surprisingly clean, though the shower head was rusty and the faucet dripped steadily. None of it mattered. I was so exhausted I dropped my backpack on the floor, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed on the bed fully clothed. I didn't even bother pulling the blanket over me. I checked the door twice out of habit, main lock, latch lock, and the chain, all secured. Then I turned off the light and passed out. I remember seeing the clock before I knocked out. It was 8:02 p.m. The next thing I remember was the phone ringing. I jolted awake, completely disoriented. It was pitch black in the room except for the digital clock glowing red on the nightstand. 11:03 p.m. I answered the motel phone without really thinking. My voice was groggy and hoarse. I just mumbled, "Hello." A man's voice, flat and emotionless, said, "There's been a complaint about noise coming from your room." I was still half asleep and couldn't process it at first. "What? No, I've been sleeping," I said. The voice paused for a second, then asked, "Are you alone in the room?" That question made me blink a few times. "Yeah, I'm alone," I said. Another pause. "Are you sure there's no one else in there with you?" he asked again. Now I was more awake, and something about the question made me uncomfortable. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said it. Not curious, but pressing, like he was hoping I'd change my answer. "I'm sure. I've been out cold since I got in." "It's just me," I said, a little sharper now. He didn't say anything else. There was just silence, then the click of him hanging up. I stared at the phone for a long moment, trying to shake the fog from my brain. The room was silent. There was no noise from anywhere nearby. No footsteps above or next door. Nothing. Just the steady drip of the faucet in the bathroom. I thought maybe someone had complained about a TV being too loud or people talking, but I hadn't even turned the TV on, and I hadn't spoken to anyone since I left the airport. Still, I was too tired to care much. I double-checked the door, made sure the chain was still on, then got back into bed. I fell asleep almost instantly. When I woke up the next morning, it was around 9:30. Sunlight was coming through the thin curtains, and for a few seconds, everything felt normal. I took a hot shower that smelled like metal and old pipes, got dressed, and started packing up my stuff. But then I remembered the phone call from the night before. It hit me all at once. How weird the whole thing was. Why would they think I was making noise? I didn't do anything. I barely moved from the second I got into the room. And the part that really stuck with me, why did the guy ask twice if I was alone? And why did he sound so indifferent, almost like he was reading from a script? I packed faster. On the way out, I stopped by the front desk. It was a different person this time, an older woman with a kind face. I asked if someone from the front desk had called me last night about a noise complaint. She looked confused. "No, I don't think so," she said. "I was here all night. We didn't make any calls. There were only a few guests last night anyway. It was really quiet." That was the moment I felt that cold, sinking feeling in my chest. I nodded, thanked her, and walked out fast. I haven't stopped thinking about that night since. The phone call wasn't from the motel. Someone else called my room. Somehow they knew the room number. They wanted to know if I was alone. They asked twice. Maybe they were calling other rooms too, trying to figure out which ones had people in them and which ones didn't. I keep playing the conversation over and over in my head. The pauses, the flat voice, the way he didn't even argue when I said I was alone. Just hung up. It didn't feel like someone trying to solve a noise complaint. It felt like someone scouting. That extra latch and chain on the door. I've never been so grateful for something so small. If I hadn't locked it, I don't know what could have happened. Maybe nothing. Maybe something awful. Ever since that night, I don't stay in cheap motels anymore. I always check reviews. I always inspect the locks. I never answer the motel phone unless I'm expecting a call. And I always use the chain. Always. Because sometimes the only thing standing between you and something really bad is a thin strip of metal and a chain hooked into a worn-out frame.